Hello, good people, and welcome to Hillbilly Cat History, Spiritual Books, the Book of John, and the Impersonal Life. And we're going to continue our reading today, delving into the Book of Life, the Book of John, Chapter 5. But first, we're going to review the rest of Chapter 4, where we left off from yesterday, and we're going to start with this song, Sealed in Gold, about messages that Elvis may have sent with gifts of jewelry that he gave away. Hello, Gun. Thank you so much for coming.
In the hush of a Vegas night, he called a close, no stage, no line. Slipped a ring on both her hands, no crowd to cheer, no wedding band, just love, just breath, just time grown old, a vow unspoken, sealed in gold. Two hearts carved in 24K, in peace, in quiet display. No diamonds loud, no eagles cry, just tenderness that doesn't lie. Worn near her skin, where stories hold a whisper of him, sealed in gold. My love, just a gift, but something whole, the myth, the memory, sealed in gold. No velvet throne, no final show, just gravel roads where true love goes. He gave her life, he gave her soul, and left behind a heart to hold. He loved my life, he wrote it in chain, a promise for through joy and pain, not just to give, something old, the myth and memory, sealed in gold, sealed in gold, sealed in gold.
Thank you for gathering here at Hillbilly Cat History, where we remember together and listen for the echoes. And today we're going to hear the echoes of the Book of John. As we move through the rest of our review of Chapter 4, using the panels from this comic book of the Bible that was printed in 1941 when Elvis was 6 years old. And he may have seen this comic. There's no way to know. We do know that he loved comic books. We know that he traded comic books with his friends. And we know even at this young age, he gave away his comic books to his friends. But this would have been a contemporary way of telling the stories from the Bible as Elvis was a child. And so he may have learned some of the stories in this way. But we know that he read through the King James Version of the Bible. And of course, the Gospel of John, the fourth book of the New Testament, very important book in the Bible, tells the story directly of Jesus. And in this panel, Jesus is in the city with the Samaritans. And the Samaritans are an offshoot of the Jewish race. They believe in the first 5 books of the Old Testament, but they don't believe in anything else, any of the other, what we would think of as scriptures. The Jews themselves believe in the Old Testament. That's their Torah. And then Christians believe the New Testament, which is not yet written, as the stories about Jesus are being told. This is the coming of the New Testament. It is unusual for a rabbi of the Jews to come out and speak to the Samaritans. But he has come and spoken to them as equals, and he's told them about his presence and that he is the Messiah and he is the Christ, who is the Savior of the Jewish people and of all people. And he has been telling them this, and they beg Jesus to stay with them. Many more believe when they hear him preach. So they haven't even really seen him do any miracles. They're believing him from his words. They have faith in Jesus. And so when Elvis as a child looked at this picture, this would have been very exotic. And the one exotic piece I'm going to point out is in the architecture. And it's to the far left and in the upper corner, and you can see a window. And that window has a screen over it, but it's not a screen like we think of a screen. Because we think of like a nylon or a aluminum screen that has very tiny holes that bugs can't come into. This screen's not stopping any bugs from coming in. It's really more like a piece of wood with some holes punched into it, and the holes have a unique and cultural design. But it's really more of a privacy thing than it is a screen to keep out anything, because the holes are simply too big for that. So it's a way to block off some of the vision through this window. And that is not an architectural piece that Elvis as a child or even as an adult would probably been very familiar with. We don't really use that kind of screen. Terry says that it's very colorful and illustrated with basic text, and it makes the story interesting. Yeah, so if he did see this as a child, it would have pulled him in. And if he had, even as a young child, read the book of John in the King James, or had it read to him by Gladys or Vernon, or in church, well, it's got some tough language in it, especially for a child to understand. So here would be those same stories, and he would be familiar with the stories, but he might understand them better here. And in this panel, it says, "Now we believe, for we have heard him ourselves, and know that this is indeed the Christ, the Savior of the world." So the Samaritans are talking to the Samaritan woman who was at the well and met Jesus first and came into the city and said, "The Messiah, the Christ, is here. You've got to hear him for yourselves." And they believed her because she's a truth teller, but they went out, and now they're coming back and telling her, you were right, and now we have faith because we have seen the Christ ourselves. And if you imagine Elvis as a child reading this, or having it read to him, and his brain, which we know that Elvis had something akin to a photographic memory. He had a very good memory. And of course, he was very attuned to sound. And language is, of course, sound. So if the oral story out of King James had been told to him, he would probably feel a resonance at this point, even as a child. But he might have better understanding. And then later, when he comes to the book, The Impersonal Life, and he reads passages in it that also resonate from the Bible, some being direct or nearly direct quotes from the Bible. In the book, The Impersonal Life is telling him there are multiple ways to hear the word, and that it comes through multiple messages. And then he maybe would think back to something like this and say, the book is right, because as a child, I experienced the stories in another way, and they were opened to me. I was able to understand things from them that I could not understand from a straight reading of the King James Bible. And now he's reading a book that also reflects the King James Bible, The Impersonal Life, and he's seeing things in it that he realizes are in the Bible, but that he didn't see clearly before, or that he is now understands better. So I think some of that's what's going on here too. And he may have never seen this particular comic, but I'm sure that they had ways of helping children experience these stories. They did when I was a small child. I remember one of the teachers in the church had a felt board, and they had felt figures, kind of like paper dolls, but made out of felt, of biblical characters. And if you stuck them onto the felt board, they would, just by friction, stick there. And they had different, like set pieces made out of felt, like the buildings that we can see in the backgrounds of some of these pictures. And then they would use those, and they would move the things around to tell the stories, similar to the toy color forms. I don't know if any of you ever played with a toy called Color Forms. And it used vinyl stickers that weren't sticky. They just adhered by friction to a slick piece of cardboard. But you could tell stories as a kid to yourself. It would come in different sets with different characters. This was similar, and it was very colorful, very much like this comic book. And so Elvis would have known that there were different ways to tell these stories. And in this panel, all the region round about hears of Jesus. He teaches in many synagogues. Now, this is a detail that we did not get out of the book of John. And the comic notes, it's from Luke 4:15. I think the comic is acknowledging to us that most of what we're seeing comes from the book of John. But for those biblical scholars who might be reading through this with their children, this is a notation to them that, yes, we pulled this from Luke and put it here where it should chronologically fit into the story. So he does stay for a couple of days, and he teaches at the synagogues, which are the holy places. Hi, Pat. Thank you for coming. Appreciate seeing you here. And in this panel, Jesus looks out over, I guess it's a valley, a very green valley with a river running through it. And he's up on the side of a cliff or possibly a mountain. And it says, so Jesus comes again into Cana of Galilee, where he made the water into wine. So Jesus is returning to the point of his first miracle. And in this panel, a certain nobleman of Capernaum, whose son is near death, hears that Jesus is in Cana and goes to find him. I think this clears up some of what we saw in the King James Bible, because I was more under the impression that this nobleman found Jesus in the Samaritan city. But this indicates Jesus is on his way back to where he had come from. And I'm assuming he's traveling with his disciples and his entourage. And there's probably people from the countryside that are gathering with those disciples to hear him. Hopefully, hoping that he's going to stop and speak. And this man is among them. He's come to find him because he's probably somebody from the Samaritan city, has made it to Capernaum and said that this man is doing miracles and he's healing people and that he's the Christ. Or maybe they're just, because I'm not clear if he's done miracles there in Samaria. Maybe they're just telling him he's the Christ, and this man has so much faith that he has come to find him to bring him back to heal his son. And in this panel, we can see the man kneels before Jesus. And it says, beseeching him that he will come down and heal his son. So he's begging Jesus as the Christ to come and heal his son with the power of God. And that would have probably touched the young Elvis, or even the older Elvis. Because here's a man whose priority is his family, and he is unable to save the child himself, so he has turned to God. And Jesus tells the man, do you believe without signs and wonders? He's asking this nobleman if he has faith that Jesus is the Christ. And the man replies, sir, come down before my child dies. Which is this man's affirmation of faith. He's telling Jesus, yes, I do have faith. I have so much faith. I know if you come, all will be well. Now we might note again the architectural elements in the background, which would have been very unusual to Elvis, really at any point in his life. And you can see again the colorful robes and clothes that all the people are wearing. And the nobleman himself has a hat that has a multicolored, I guess that's a brim, but it's not a brim like we would think of. It's more like the fabric of the hat is rolled up. And where it's rolled up, it shows stripes and multicolors like the rainbow. He also has a fancy design on a strip that's sewn around his sleeves. And I think these are the indications of his wealth. And Jesus tells the nobleman, "Go your way, your son lives." He's basically affirming to the nobleman that your faith in me is enough to heal your son. I don't have to actually go there. You have shown the faith by coming here and acknowledging the faith. And now go home, all is well. And when the nobleman reaches his home, his servants run out to meet him, and they say, "Your son lives." So what he's been told is true. And the man asks, when did he begin to recover? The man seeks verification of his faith. I'm not really sure what the Bible's telling us here, because faith is something that's unverified. But this man does know the moment that Jesus told him his son was healed. And his servant tells him yesterday at the 7th hour, and this was the hour when Jesus had said, "Your son lives." And so the faith is confirmed. Or perhaps not the faith, but the results of the faith are confirmed. And Gunn says that she thinks it's too much to ask to believe without signs and wonder, without miracles. But this man didn't get his miracle until after the faith. And so his faith is something very special. And I think that's what's being illustrated within the story. And I think faith is linked to loyalty. Elvis was very big on loyalty, which I think in his mind may have been that those who were in his circle would have faith in Elvis, that he would do the right thing for them. Not faith that he was a savior or a spiritual guru of some kind, but that as their friend, he would always think of them first and do what was best for them. I think that is part of the measure of loyalty that he was looking for. And I think he may have also struggled with his own faith. He always believed in God and that he would reunite with Gladys. But he often lost faith in his own purpose, I think. He would find meaning and then sink to a level of moral despair and then have to fight his way back up. And in this next panel, the nobleman is reunited with his son, who is healed. And the nobleman believed, and his whole house. So it wasn't just that this nobleman believes, the entire household now believes in Jesus. Now, it could be that they didn't believe at all, other than the nobleman, prior to the miracle, as Gunn has stated, that their faith needed a miracle. And that through this nobleman's faith, the miracle was provided that was required to bring them all into the faith. And in this panel, Jesus is followed by many people, an entourage, and fans, people who want to know him. This is always during the period Elvis is reading The Impersonal Life. This part's always going to resonate with Elvis because this has been happening to him since 1955. And it says, Jesus and his followers going from Judea to Galilee passed through Samaria. But I'm realizing I've actually circled back to the beginning of the story because we reached the end of chapter 4 with the previous panel. So I hope I haven't confused anybody. I almost confused myself there. But this is where that chapter ended. That he believed in his whole house and they had all come to the faith of Jesus. Now let me switch over to our text. And this is the book of John, chapter 5, King James Version, verse 1. After this, there was a feast of the Jews, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. So Jesus returns to Jerusalem. We've already seen him there. He got angry in the temple because it had become a marketplace. And he had been questioned why he thought he had the authority to throw anybody out. And he had prophesied that if they were to tear the temple down, he would renew it within 3 days. And that was the prophecy of the temple of his body being destroyed and the resurrection. And Gunn says, so Elvis believed dependent on some way that Gladys was dead and that he wanted to meet her again. He sort of had to believe to meet her. I believe so, yes. And it's not just that she's dead, it's that she raised him within this faith. This is the faith of Gladys. And Gladys is the central figure of his life. That prior to Gladys's death, Gladys is Elvis's I am. That he does not listen to a voice inside his heart. He listens to the voice of his heart, who is Gladys. It's a voice he can truly hear, and that when he speaks to her, she tells him truth. Now, is Gladys always correct? No. She's as fallible as anybody else. But her priority is always Elvis. Always Elvis. And so, after she's gone, there's no one who can vocalize the I am for Elvis. Vernon loves him. Minnie Mae loves him. He can turn to either of them. and he can bare his heart and his soul to them, and he can trust them with it. But they are unable to vocalize or verbalize in the way that Gladys could. They're not able to speak to his heart or say things that he recognizes as spiritual wisdom. That is what he's searching for prior to 1964. He needs to hear that voice. He's got it inside him, and he reaches it to some extent. I think that's part of the attraction of the karate. It has the meditative and spiritual aspects. And so he begins to be still. And he listens. But he doesn't know that I am God. He doesn't know that part yet. He's just being still, and he listens. And he begins to absorb, and he's thinking deeply about these things. And he continues with the meditation, and he continues with the karate, and he finds solace in these things. And then Larry brings him this book, The Impersonal Life, and he suddenly realizes that he can hear Gladys, or the I Am, again within himself. And I'm not equating Gladys to God. I'm equating Gladys to one way that Elvis was able to hear the word. As the book says, it comes in many different forms, like the comic book, but definitely through the advice that Gladys gave him, through the time that she spent with him, and through the love that they shared. And so the love that he has for Gladys is also, I think, the basis of his thoughts of love, and that he needs his religion, which is Christian, but does not lean as heavily into love, into forgiveness, into inclusion of people outside the circle, as he feels the love from Gladys did, the love that he knows to be the basis of his life. And so I think this is all part of what he's searching for. But back into this text, verse 2, now there is at Jerusalem by the sheep market a pool, which is called in the Hebrew tongue Bethesda, having 5 porches. So I'm assuming the word Bethesda is telling us 5 porches, which it does seem like you probably should have a special word for a place that has 5 porches. That seems impressive. Now, I'm not really sure that porches are exactly what we think of as porches, but they must be, well, perhaps some kind of open air area that's maybe covered and has a floor. Perhaps it's something more substantial than that. We see that there's also a pool, and that they're selling sheep. And verse 3, in these lay a great multitude of impotent folk, of blind, halt, withered, waiting for the moving of the water. There are many sick people gathered here, many sick and disabled people. And in verse 4, for an angel went down at a certain season into the pool and troubled the water. Whosoever then first, after the troubling of the water, stepped in, was made whole of whatsoever disease he had. The verse is saying there's some kind of spiritual miracle going on here at this water. that every so often a person can step into the water and be completely healed. And it's being attributed to an angel that's coming down, and this says troubling the water. So I'm imagining that means stir or ripple the water, and that it's some kind of blessing to the water. And these people are all waiting their turn to take part in that blessing. And I think this would have probably touched Elvis, because we know of his deep feelings about people who were sick or disabled and his ability to help them. There are many stories out there about wheelchairs and special equipment and money that Elvis gave to various folks who were afflicted in an attempt to make their life better, to maybe trouble the waters. Although he couldn't heal them necessarily, there are stories that he did try to heal, and at least one that he actually did after he read this book. Not immediately after, but in the years following this book. And of course, he bought hundreds of copies of The Impersonal Life, which I was referencing by this book. He bought hundreds of copies of that book and annotated them and gave them away. So the messages within that book were very important to him. And they do talk about the ability to heal, because once you're in tune with the divine, you can control the cells of your body or the cells of others. That's a promise that's made within the book. And here in John, we're seeing reflected that there are people who need you to be able to heal. And in verse 5, and a certain man was there, which had an infirmity 38 years. So this man had been afflicted for nearly 40 years. And in verse 6, when Jesus saw him lie, and knew that he had been now a long time in that case, he saith unto him, Wilt thou be made whole? And so Jesus asked the man if he wants to be healed. Seems like he probably does. He's here at the spot of healing. But Jesus confirms with him, do you want to be healed? And in verse 7, the impotent man answered him, Sir, I have no man when the water is troubled to put me into the pool. But while I am coming, another steppeth down before me. So the man answers that he does want to be healed, and he's trying to be healed, but someone keeps pushing him aside to take his turn in the pool. And so he's been here a long time trying to be healed, but he can't get into the pool. And in verse 8, Jesus saith unto him, Rise, take up thy bed, and walk. So Jesus has told the man he doesn't need to get in the pool. He's already healed. And in verse 9, and immediately the man who was made whole and took up his bed and walked. And on the same day was the Sabbath. So this man was cured, and it's noted that he was cured on the Jewish holy day, which is 1 day per week. It's what we would think of as Saturday, the last day of the week, not the first day of the week, as Christians tend to worship together on Sunday. but technically that's the first day of the week. And so I think this would have resonated as a spiritual goal for Elvis. That here were people being made whole and they were being healed. And when he reads in the Impersonal life that the divine power could be attuned through him if he were attuned to the divine, and these things could happen, that he wanted that to happen. Now, I don't know if that part's good, because then it starts to become, did he want it for himself or did he want it for the divine? But he believes that this power is possible because it's written about here in the book of John. And in verse 10, the Jews therefore said unto him that was cured, it is the Sabbath day. It is not lawful for thee to carry thy bed. So the Jewish faith says that you're not supposed to do any work on the Sabbath. And apparently if you carry anything, and again, I'm not a Jewish or biblical scholar, so I don't know how big something has to be that you're carrying before it becomes a burden and therefore work. But apparently this bed that he has, it's over the limit. Somewhat like when you fly in an airplane and your carry-on bag is too large. It's not a carry-on bag anymore. It's too big. Now you've broken the rules. And in this case, the Jews, who we might also interpret as the Pharisees, I don't know that these are Pharisees. These could just be highly Orthodox Jews. They're saying it's not lawful for you to carry that bed, even though we saw the miracle that just occurred that allows you to carry the bed. And in verse 11, he answered them, he that made me whole, the same said unto me, take up thy bed and walk. And so the man is indicating that he has authority to carry this bed on the Sabbath because obviously Jesus is the Son of God. He just healed him in a miracle. We all have to agree now that he is the Son of God. And therefore he outrules all of us and any of us who would make the rules. And he has given him dispensation. You know, like a teacher would give you a hall pass, and the hall monitor would therefore not be able to stop you. Been overruled. I think that might have resonated with Elvis in the 70s, and maybe before, because he often overruled certain rules in order to allow his friends to be with him. And in the next verse, verse 12, then asked they him, what man is that which said unto thee, take up thy bed and walk? Now, I'm not sure why they ask him this, because in the previous verse, let's just look back. He said, he that made me whole said, do this. So maybe he didn't point out who it was, and maybe these particular Jews or Pharisees, they didn't see that Jesus healed him. I guess that's possible. Hello, Pamela. Thank you so much for coming. Appreciate seeing you here. And in verse 13, and he that was healed was not who it was, for Jesus had conveyed himself away, a multitude being in that place. So this man's unable to point him out. He kind of turns around and Jesus has disappeared into the crowd, not even sure who he was. But he knows that he was the Son of God or the Christ or the Messiah, but he can't point him out. He's been lost into the crowd. And in verse 14, afterward Jesus findeth him in the temple, and said unto him, Behold, thou art made whole. Sin no more, lest a worse thing come unto thee. So this wasn't the last time the man saw Jesus. Jesus circled around and found him in the temple. And then he gave him some advice. The advice seems to indicate that the man had sinned in the past, and that is what led to his affliction. And so the healing apparently is also some forgiving mixed in. There's been a forgiveness, and that has lifted the affliction. I'm not sure about that, but it seems to be packed into this particular verse. But the man couldn't point out Jesus, but Jesus, he remembered who this was. I think that's significant too. It may be that the man would have been able to point out Jesus, he just couldn't see him in the crowd. But the circling back and talking to people later, I think this is something Elvis does as well. He notes people, and then he finds a way to circle back to them later. Sometimes they're brought to him. Most of the time they're brought to him, but sometimes he manages to work out a way to bump into them. And in verse 15, the man departed and told the Jews that it was Jesus which had made him whole. And in 16, and therefore did the Jews persecute Jesus and sought to slay him because he had done these things on the Sabbath day. So the Pharisees have come forward to say that miracles are also not allowed on the Sabbath, that also is work. This is again some kind of airline carry-on policy. You know, your bag can only be so big, and apparently the miracles have burst through that size of bag, and they got to go to baggage. They're not allowed to come on as carry-on. You've broken the rules, and the penalty in this case is not that you get kicked off the flight, it's that you are slain. They're going to kill you. They want to take his life because he has healed people on a day that they don't think he should have. It's not really the healing that bothers them. It's that they feel the people should have suffered for another day because of a rule that they have in place, which is an interpretation of something God has told them. But they're no longer using it for the will of the Father. And in 17, but Jesus answered them, My Father worketh hitherto, and I work. In other words, he's saying, Dad told me I got to heal these people today, and you don't get to tell Dad what to do because he makes the rule. And I know that you're quoting one of his rules, but that's a rule for you. That's not my rule, because I'm reporting directly to the big guy. That might have resonated with Elvis as well, because many rules did not apply to him. And he often would use not his father, but the colonel as a reason that he did things when people thought that maybe he shouldn't have been. Or they, if he was in a movie that they didn't like, well, that was the colonel. He put out songs that didn't do well, that was the colonel. Now, that's not what's happening here. Jesus is blessing his father. But it's just a similar statement that Elvis sometimes makes. I was told, got to do this today. That's why we're doing it today. And his people that work for him, they say the same thing. When people say, it's 2:00 in the morning, did you know that? And they say, well, Elvis wants it right now. And in 18, therefore the Jews sought the more to kill him, because he had not only had broken the Sabbath, but said also that God was his father, making himself equal with God. And now we come to the reason that the Jews really want to kill Jesus. It's not that he broke the Sabbath, that's the technicality that they're able to bring him in on. But it's that he said God was his father. And they're saying that he's saying he's equal to God. Now, they can't really get him on this one. They can get him on the Sabbath. They can prosecute him for the Sabbath. They could try to prosecute him for this, but then they've already seen he's performing miracles. And he'll whip a miracle out on them. And that will make it look like he is the Son of God. And they won't be able to actually prove he's not. It would have to be taken on faith, and they can't depend on the faith of all of these people that follow them. They have to have real proof. And the proof is he broke the Sabbath. Yes, he performed a miracle, but he can't be the Son of God because he did it on the Sabbath. And no Son of God would do that. Now, Jesus says, yes, he would, because God told me, got to do it today. But they're dismissing that. Their real issue, though, is that if he is the Son of God, then he is beyond their equal. Suddenly, their positions of power within the Orthodox structure, well, they're in jeopardy. And in 19, well, let's just talk about that for a second, that their positions are in jeopardy. I think this would echo for Elvis in the words of Frank Sinatra, who early on in Elvis's career made some nasty statements about rock and roll and Elvis's participation in rock and roll. And when the press asked Elvis how he felt about it, about those statements, he said that he would not speak against Frank Sinatra, who he greatly admired, but that he did think Frank should not have said those words. That Elvis's own career was a mirror of Frank Sinatra's career, and that if anyone should understand Elvis, it should be Frank. And that's why Elvis was disappointed that Frank had said those things. But he respected Frank immensely and Frank's opinion. You know, Frank was allowed to have his opinion. Elvis did not agree with it, but that did not mean that Elvis did not admire Frank. And so Frank is the Pharisees in this story. He is terrified of the power of this new arrival who threatens his position within the structure that he knows. the entertainment industry. And so I am not comparing Elvis to Jesus in any way, but that Elvis signaled a massive cultural change and shift, and he brought some of that himself. And he certainly sang about it. And Frank heard the message and knew that the new thing was here, and he feared him. Now, after Elvis comes back from the army, shown that he's a good person, that he's going to stand up and do his civic duty, that he's no better than his fellow man, that he's not put himself above anybody, Frank has an amazingly different attitude towards Elvis. Now, some of it has to do with Frank wanted a certain television show he had to succeed, and he brought Elvis onto it, got a lot of ratings and stuff like that. But I believe Frank began to admire Elvis as time went on, and probably because of that statement, that Elvis respected Frank's opinion, even if he did not agree with it. And that is where we are going to end this for today. And when we come back, we'll be on verse 19, chapter 5 in the book of John. And I'm going to leave you all with a song. And today we will do He Gave Away His Heart. And until I see you all again. Well, wait a second. Let me answer a couple of questions here. Pat says, this is so much to take in. It is very dense, Pat. I do agree. But you can come back and watch it again, hopefully. And Gunn says, didn't Frank change opinion later? Yes, I think he did. Or was it really only for the show? I don't think it was just for the show. But there were some issues there, too. Elvis was dating clandestinely Frank's girlfriend, Juliet Prowse, during the filming of G.I. Blues. So that was a bit of an impediment to a long-term relationship with Frank. But I think Frank got over that part and respected Elvis as a professional. But thank each and every one of you for being here with me today. I do know the material is dense, so if you feel that, and you want to tell me that we got to slow it down, or you think maybe we should change to a different book, or do something else, I'm open to all suggestions. Feel free to put it in the comments. I read every one, and I am reading through this as an exploration of Elvis, and I probably would never do this if it wasn't for all of you. And I am learning an intense and incredible amount, and I hope that you are all getting that as well. But until I see you all again, you all keep on taking care of business, and this is He Gave Away His Heart.
Midnight lights, rhinestone fire, Arabian suit, burning with desire. He hit the stage like thunder rolls. Vegas shook and the story unfolds. Charlie's birthday, crowd went wild. He cracked a joke and sang with style. But just before he sang Hurt So Deep, he stopped the show and made us weep. He gave away his heart, not just a song, diamonds and gold, where the love belongs. Rings and shades from the man backstage. He healed the broken, he lit the flame. Oh, he gave away his heart. blackened hair, the man stepped near. Elvis smiled, the crowd could hear. Thanks to you, we raised the light. 17,000 hearts took flight. Then back behind the velvet door, he gave away a little more. Music ring, a boxcar shine, a suit that held his sacred time. He gave away his heart, not just a song, diamonds and gold, where the love belongs. Rings and shades from the man backstage. He healed the broken, he lit the flame. Oh, he gave away his heart, and I saw it all that night. He didn't need applause to know his worth. He gave away his soul in Vegas mirth. Not just a king, but something more. A man who knew what hearts were for. Gave away his heart, not just a soul. Pieces of love where the brave belong. Ritual gifts from the man backstage. He saved the hurting, hid the flame. Oh, he gave away his heart, and I'll never be the same. I was there, I saw the rings, I saw the light. Gave away his heart, and it burned so bright.
We are walking with Elvis. Do you hear his footsteps?